And once again, I'd like to welcome everybody back to the Buffalo History Channel. This one is a very, very special one. I have to first start off by saying that in the time that I started the Buffalo History Channel, I normally get many requests to do different stories, different Buffalo stories. But this one right here, I have to say, has become one of the most highly requested stories from many areas, from people that were older, some people that were around my age, that were younger, people that were a part of this effort, and people have been clamoring for this story for quite some time. And I do a little bit of research on it, came across some very interesting information about it. And I bought this gentleman right here. Certainly you all recognize him because he can give a lot of insight, as he was among the founders of this particular effort. This effort that I'm talking about is none other than the Randy Smith Basketball Classic. He's going to tell the story behind it, give us a full historical perspective of it, because it did not start out as the Randy Smith Basketball Classic. We'll be talking about its early beginnings and its origins, its Marvel origin story, if you will. Now, to introduce this gentleman, you know him, none other than the one and only George Butch Holt. George, welcome to the Buffalo History Channel, my brother.
Thank you very much. It's certainly an honor, Doug, to have this opportunity to be able to tell a story so it could be documented.
Yes.
For our our history in terms of our young people, and also some of the bright minds who would like to look into opportunities to probably create some opportunities around organizing sports as a vehicle to give our young people an opportunity to get a quality education.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, for speaking for myself, I mean, speaking for myself personally, I was not a basketball player in my younger years, but I can remember, as far back as I can recall, the first time I heard about the Randy Smith Basketball Classic was pretty much when I was in junior high school. And then people would talk about going down in to have played in it, Martin Luther King Park, and
Humboldt Park.
Humboldt Park, yes. And to have played in it. Yes. It was you were the best of the best that played in it. And it was something, it mirrored the Rucker Park in New York City. Yes. So was Buffalo's version of that. So let's go back to the very, very beginning. How did you get involved in this? Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
How'd you get involved?
Okay, it all started with two former athletes. One from University of Buffalo, name was Bob Williams, and myself from Buffalo State College. I was at that time working with the City of Buffalo Parks and Recreation, JFK Recreation Center, which was one of the most beautiful facilities at that time to organize sports activities. Bob Williams came to me with this idea of Operation Sports Rescue. When he came to me, he brought me on as a person that helped him organize it, because he was from New York City. He played for University of Buffalo, a very bright young man. He was not only a good person who can communicate, but he had excellent writing skills. So Bob came to me in the early 70s, I would say roughly around 72, 73, 1972 and 73, and talked to me about developing this summer basketball program. So it all started at Windy Playground. Windy Park was a site that we started this opportunity. And the catalyst of it all was when Bob said, listen, you get the local athletes together, and I'm going to bring in Julius Erving from New York. Bob Williams brought in Julius Erving. We had Randy Smith, All the top local players participate in spring and Broadway. And we had a young man named Donald Gilly. Donald Gilly was a music guy. So Donald lived right at Spring and Broadway too, and he hooked his music up. And we had chords running across the street. And we had music playing while Julius Irving was participating in Windy Park. And believe me, that crowd was so packed. People were standing everywhere, but also on the top of the fence at Windy Park. So after that particular event, everybody got a whiff of, wow, how great that was. So we had an opportunity at that time. Leroy Coles, who was the head of the Buffalo Urban League, he was my brother-in-law. So every time when something I did good, I would chat back with him and say, hey, Leroy, that was a great program. And Bob knew that Leroy was my brother-in-law. So he said, Butch, let's go sit down with Mr. Coles. So we got a chance one day to organize a meeting, sit down with Mr. Coles, and Bob did his homework and looking at foundations that supports, educational sports related programs. And because that money was going in the past to traditional agencies like the Westminster House, the Buffalo Urban League, and a few others that was under the United Way. So we got an opportunity to sit with Mr. Coles, and Bob said to him, Mr. Coles, I got an opportunity where we can have a meeting with Wells v. Moot. And yes, that was the Moot Foundation, Western New York Foundation. And then from there, we met with Mr. Moot. And Mr. Moot's office was located in one of the highest buildings in downtown Buffalo. And when we walked in his office, it had a picture window. And you know what we could see? JFK facility, the football field, the basketball courts and everything. But you know what was interesting? Now, one person was on them facilities. And that was the catalyst to bring Mr. Moot's attention to why we're here, to help organize activities for our young men and women so they can participate in organized events. Because in that era, in the late 60s and the 70s, they were sending a lot of our youth to detention facilities. They call them person in needs of supervision. Right. And so many of these kids were going in these group homes and everything, and we didn't have organized activities at these particular facilities because these facilities was run by the political system. And a lot of times the political system had campaign workers working at these facilities with no educational background or recreational background, knew how to organize these particular activities. So I was fortunate to, come through a system, not only through recreation, you got the opportunity through recreation, but I also got a quality education. I finished my master's degree in 1974, and I knew the importance of coupling athletics with educational opportunities. So Bob knew I had that grasp in terms of how to organize, understanding how we use this sports as a vehicle, which was basketball at that particular time. And what we did, we sat with Mr. Moot. Mr. Moot said to Mr. Coles, Mr. Coles, if you raise 25,000, I would raise 25,000. So Mr. Coles got together his network. Back in that time, that network was David Eccles, Robert Penn. They were running, they were operating out of City Hall. and we got all them guys together. Donald Lee. These are historical names who were, players in
Yep.
terms of understanding political system, had skills knowing how to write for grants and things like that. And Mr. Coles got them together, and we had a meeting at Liberty Bank Building on Main and Genesee. And in that meeting, we had a presentation of what we're trying to accomplish in terms of using sports as a vehicle to give kids an opportunity to have a quality education. And basketball was that particular vehicle because we were two former basketball players at our Bob was at University of Buffalo, and I was at Buffalo State College at that time, which is now called Buffalo State University, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So from that experience, what we did, we worked that year working under that grant, which was $50,000. We spent time looking at locations we can host this summer basketball league. So one day, Bob and I went to Humboldt Park. And the catch why to have it at Humboldt Park, because Humboldt Park set in the center of this urban center of the city of Buffalo. And from my personal experience working in parks and recreation, I had an opportunity to work at different recreation centers. I worked in a recreation center on the west side of Buffalo. I worked in recreation centers in North Buffalo. I worked in South Towns. I went everywhere. So from that experience, people got to know me because I worked in these recreation centers. So when we started putting together the program called Operation Sports Rescue, we organized the leagues around the recreation centers, where we in them particular areas. And then we came up with the idea of Humboldt Park. So we would have teams from Delavan Moselle area, teams from Salvation Army, teams from South Buffalo, the Perry Projects, JFK, the Fruit Belt. So this would bring these kids together to participate in summer events. Now, the catalyst was the Unlimited League. The Unlimited League brought in the young men who were either going to college or on their way to college. And we brought in some of them kids we had top talent at that particular time. We had Keith Robinson, who went to Notre Dame. We had Cliff Robinson, who went to UConn. We had Rob Lanier, who now is a coach at SMU. He went to St. Bonaventures. We had some talented kids. Dwight Williams went to Providence. All these particular kids, Kurt Akins, who went on to Pittsburgh. I can go on and on with some great, in terms of who participated in this event at a young age, before their names got recognized in the institutions they went to. So from there, we had Operation Sports Rescue. And then Comprehensive Employment and Training Act came in.
The CETA
that was
program.
under the CETA program. That was under the United Way. The gentleman's name was Bob Bennett. Bob Bennett went on to become an educational counselor for New York State out of the United Way. And I networked with Mr. Bennett, and Mr. Bennett said the way we could do this is to be the pass through the Buffalo Urban League. So we sat down with Mr. Coles, and Mr. Coles said, yes, just come up on the Urban League. In the meantime, Bob leaves Buffalo and goes back to New York. But he went to New York to continue to be an organizer, around the Rooker League, and trying to put on he put on one of the most effective program in Madison Square Garden, where a summer games was played in the garden. It was amazing. He brought in the NBA players. He brought in Artist Gilmore, Bob Lanier, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I can name all the Randy Smith, man. Everybody was at that event. I can remember standing today on that Madison Garden court. You know what I mean? And we're going to have this particular event. And I was part of that through Operation Sports Rescue. And we put it on the National Urban League. See, Bob was smart. He networked with a local Buffalo Urban League, and then he went with the National Urban League. And this is how I'm going to tell you how we went from the Buffalo Urban League Youth Development Program under CETA. And now when we was in the Buffalo Urban League Youth Development Program, I had a time to write, understand how we need to get this independently. Because the Urban League had several programs. And, we wanted to maintain our independence. So what happened was that, if you can recall the history, and you can do some history, Urban League caught on fire. It was the same year when it caught Pratt and Broadway caught on fire. The same year that Jimmy Griffin and Art Eve ran for mayor. The same year. So what happened there was Jimmy Griffin won the mayoral race. He beat Mr. Eve out. And when the place caught on fire, we lost, the Urban League was closed down, and we lost office space. And believe it or not, when I went back into that building, Doug, the only office wasn't damaged was our office. And it was a poster up on the wall from J.D. Hill of the Buffalo Bills, encouraging me to stay down and keep working with the youth, because I was associated with professional athletes through my era. Their favorite line was McAdoo and Randy. If I come into the Buffalo Braves locker room, they would say, "Here come urban renewal." Because
I can imagine that. They're like, "Oh Lord, we got to do something in the community now."
Yeah, right. That was their whole take on me, right? Mm-hmm. So from there, the Urban League, and from there, we had to find office space. So one day, I'm walking down from a meeting at Chippewa in Delaware, and I run into Tom Griffin. Tom Griffin was a former basketball coach at Bryant and Stratton. He coached a lot of African-American young men. And he asked me what I was doing. I was telling him we're trying to get this league back strong and what we need to do. But I said, the most important thing, we need office space. Mm-hmm. So the day I walked in City Hall to meet with Jimmy Griffin, as I'm walking up to the desk to find out where the mayor's office is, there was Herb Bellamy Sr., Mr. Bellamy. And Mr. Bellamy said, "What you doing here?" Because, see, at that time, Arthur Eve lost. Griffin was the mayor. I mean, we had to recover from going, because that was really a black and white fight issue. You know what I mean? For us giving our first opportunity to have a black mayor in the city of Buffalo.
Yeah.
So Mr. Bellamy took me to Jimmy Griffin's office. He walked right up with me. Walk up there, he said, Mr. Griffin, this is Mr. Holt. He's trying to get his recreation program, because everybody knew what I was doing at that particular time in terms of Humboldt Park and how we were trying to get that together. And Jimmy Griffin gave me an office space on the fifth or sixth floor in the city hall. And then when he gave us that office space, then I had to develop an incorporation. And then we developed National Inner City Youth Opportunity. Now, the person who wrote my first proposal or helped me wrote it and edit it and put it in the profession was Octavia Hudson. If
Yes.
you remember Octavia Hudson,
Yep.
a very sharp young lady. She got into, I think, the movie industry. She's out of
Television.
California now.
Yep.
She's a sharp, very sharp girl. I
She
used
was
to
on
go
the
to her
news
house.
and she was on the news in Buffalo.
It was on the news in Buffalo. She helped me write my first proposal.
Wow.
And then when I put that together, the corporation papers was organized for the late Charles Davis. He is Charles Davis, the attorney, who was a former colleague of mine at Buffalo State. He was a few years ahead of me, but he played for Buffalo State also. And then I went to Randy as an incorporator. I said, Randy, here's an opportunity. We can put this Randy Smith Classic in your name at Martin Luther King Park, at Humboldt Park at that particular time. And I need you to sign this corporation paper. Man, Doug, I had to run around the house with him for an hour and a half to get him to sign that paper.
Really?
He was, yeah, because he wasn't he really didn't know what he was signing into. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Okay.
And but he had to trust. He had to trust in me and say, "Hey, go out there and do a good job." Because at that time his name was Perkin, and people was coming after him for this and that and all that. And he put trust in me to get that project established, because he really didn't do his homework and understanding what the corporation was about or understanding what the programs, but he knew his name was going to be associated with that league. And he wanted me to make sure that his name carried with some integrity. And I committed to that I would do that. And so from there, we had MLK Park, and we started doing our homework, how we were going to enhance that facility. At that time, we had small bleachers and everything. And at that time, Mickey Howard, remember Mickey Howard? He was part of the city of Buffalo, and he had up a task force to help organize the MLK Park. Making sure they had the greenery, maintaining the apparatuses that was in the park. And also, he was the one who helped me bring in the necessary bleachers that was needed in that park. And to be able to hold the type of population we was getting to come in on Thursday nights and the weekends to watch that Randy Smith League come to fruition. Now, I must give credit to Larry Stitz, who was a great administrator, Chris Fuller, who also was a great administrator, because when they took the leadership, I moved on to Albany. And when I moved into Albany, I became a special delinquency prevention funding person, or that was my title. And I would go across to New York State and make sure there were prevention dollars for kids, like programs like the Randy Smith League and things, versus using them dollars toward detention. And I was able to spearhead a grant for 150 to 100, 180,000, never forget. NICYO office was in Agape Church, and Larry Stitt was the director. And we had Richard Nelson, William Nelson, and a few others. Crystal People was part of our network, and we channeled in $180,000 into that program, NICYO, because I give credit to having that opportunity for two people. Johnny B. Wiley, you may have heard that name.
Yes, absolutely.
Johnny B. Wiley was the guru for detention facilities, and Arthur O'Eve. The day I flew into Albany, Arthur O'Eve happened to be on the same plane I was going, and he was going to work. And I sat next to him. And I said to Mr. Eve, I said, Mr. Eve, I'm going to an interview. He said, where are you going to interview at? I said, New York State Division for Youth. And I went to that interview, and Mr. Eve went with me. And he was the pioneer of special delinquency prevention program funding throughout New York State. Him and other assemblymen throughout New York City. And he told the supervisor at the time, Nona Joseph, he said, this young man done one heck of a job in the city of Buffalo, using sports as a vehicle to get kids a quality education. And he brought the attention to, I never forget his words, he brought attention to a park that was very underutilized. And that park today, under his leadership, is one of the most recognized parks in the city of Buffalo that brought people together. And that young lady sat me down and asked me when I wanted to start the work, you know, from Mr. E's blessing. So I got to bring these names up because all of them played a pivotal role in our success in that Randy Smith Classic. And that classic served, starting with the ages of 8 years old to, let's say, grown men up to 20-something years, 25 or more or older. And also, we brought in young ladies. Angela Reese, who went to Ohio State. I mean, we brought in some young ladies that brought this program together. But I give one credit to another young man who got me involved in politics, who really started the girls off really strong. And that was Moody Pugh. Moody Pugh was the guy at JFK Recreation Center. He worked with the girls and coached them. And he was the one, I give credit, really got these girls into basketball in Western New York. And Doug, give you a little tidbit on that also. He was the gentleman that came to me to get me involved in politics. It was Moody Pugh. Mr. Eve came on and endorsed me in the late period of the time in the month of August prior to the primary. But it was Moody Pugh who came to me and said, George, I think you can have an opportunity to win this race for the work you have done. And the person who lost to me was Byron Brown. The only race Byron Brown ever lost.
That's a little known. There's a little known history fact.
That's a history fact.
Interesting.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Well, Moody Pugh knew my work ethic. When I first started at JFK Recreation Center at 17, 18 years of age and played basketball and worked in the community center, he knew the quality of my work ethic. That's why, and he's seen the growth of the Randy Smith Classic, and he's seen the history from Operation Rescue to Buffalo Urban League to National Initiative Youth Opportunity. He knew that I could do that responsibility as elected official.
Okay. Well, thank you for that wonderful breakdown of the Randy Smith Basketball Classic and how the whole thing just came together. Now we know that it is made with the impact that it's made on the community. What was the response from the parents and even some of the people, the kids, those kids that were involved in it? Because we know there's been too many to name about the on-court local legends. But what was the response from the community?
The community was very supportive of us. We never had no serious problems. We even lift the self-esteem for so many people. We had a young man who had the opportunity to be on the mic named Willie Earl. Willie Earl House he had a personality. He was our MC, and he knew how to communicate with our grassroots community. He would lift them up, and if they wouldn't have something undecent, he'd call them out. But what he did, he brought their self-esteem up. So on Sundays, when they came to see an unlimited game, Doug, you will look around the crowd and you'll see how nice everybody was dressed. It was a beautiful sight. You know, how he would reinforce kids and get their self-esteem up. And we did that with a young man who, like I said before, was disabled. And we called him Saturday Night Live. This is a guy who had a Down syndrome. And he became a celebrity in that community, and everybody loved him when they see him in the street. Saturday Night Live, you know,
I heard of him.
And you know, that's kind of the community aspect. Right. In that community, we never had no major problems. The years that I ran that program and got it up and running, no one attacked anyone. We brought neighborhoods together, competing against each other. And we made an environment where a fruit belt, this is how their community, their colors was orange. Mm-hmm. Do you know their fans came down to that park and they all had orange on? You know, it was amazing, man, that the impact that program did for that community. And the kids that were able to participate represent the neighborhood that they were from. It was so much I could say about that community involvement. And, you know, I got to go back to my personal history. You know, that's how I met Maddie. I met Maddie at a Fillmore business meeting at Lee's Lounge in the back room. Cliff Bell was the chairman of the Fillmore Association. And that's how we got started. You know, Maddie had a little restaurant. I don't know, you didn't know the history of that, Maddie's.
Yeah, absolutely.
At that time it was under Mr. White owned the building, and he still had his little sign out there. And Maddie was the cook. The Greeks left, and then Maddie took over, and she was the community icon, a lady that came from a waitress to become the queen that she is today. So, you know, that's how I met her. You know, so she was part of that community. And that community grew. with our involvement. It was the economic engine during that summer. What was amazing were the number of people that walked down Fillmore Avenue, stopping in stores, coming off of Broadway, coming from the fruit belt. I mean, we had a average attendance, man, could ran between 2,500 people on a given day at that event, and so many good things. After the after parties that took place, after
Talk
the
about
game,
talk about the after parties.
yeah, all that took place. I mean, people, money, economics, money was generated. People had jobs. Now, another thing with the community, the number of young men and women had jobs, through the Mayor Summer Youth Program. The athletic directors, the educational coordinators. I mean, it was a very effective vehicle in that era. And like you said, people in that community haven't forgotten. And during that era too, Doug, I was like behind the scenes because I was administrator. I never got on the mic. I never tried to boost my ego. Who is running this? I always stayed in the background and networked with the people to do their job efficiently and effectively. So it grew from that. I never ran around in that community, even when I was elected official, to boast of my efforts I put in. I put a lot of sweat equity into that responsibility. And I knew when to leave at the right time, to bring on new leadership, and to pass it on. And I can't, I'll be remiss if I don't mention the young lady who kept NICYO name alive for over 40 something years, and that was the late Joyce Wilson.
Yes, absolutely.
Joyce Wilson.
Absolutely.
She
Absolutely.
kept that name alive.
Yes, she did.
It was just unfortunate. It never got back to the height of the success we had under our leadership. But she kept the corporation name alive. And I always give her credit for that, because Randy Smith brought her to me. That's how she got started. Randy brought her and said, George, she's a great communicator. And that's how she got started. And she created history there. And we were blessed to have a person like that kept that name alive for that long, all close to 50 years.
Now, how long did the Randy Smith go on? When did it end?
Okay, we were in our peak years in the 80s.
Right.
We were in our peak years in the 80s. I think it kind of ended after Randy's NBA career. I'm trying to think of the dates on that, and it's a good question. It's sometime in the 90s, but one of the biggest obstacles we had to encounter was these issues where kids had opportunity to have access to guns, insecurity for the public. With that kind of crowd, and then these young men start getting access to guns, it kind of directed in a whole different direction, and they were struggling at that time. Chris can talk about the ending, because he was part of that. Chris Fuller, he can talk a little more about that, because they struggled with trying to get money for security guards and things of that nature. So it started dying out, you know, at the end of Chris Fuller's period. And Joyce tried to pick it up, but she could never get it up to that height that it was when it was at its peak. But Chris can speak to the ending of that.
Yeah. Okay.
And Joyce tried to change the name to Jeff Nixon and all that. It never could work. It just couldn't work, at the end of the day.
When we talk about basketball and we talk about Randy Smith, and we certainly can't let this go by without giving a mention to the Buffalo Braves and the fact that Buffalo has not had an NBA basketball team since they left. Can you talk to me about what was the impact of the Buffalo Braves to the city of Buffalo?
Well, the impact was amazing. And, I was fortunate enough to play with that young man. I was a junior and he was a senior at Buffalo State College. At that time, too, I was working at JFK Recreation Center. And a young man named John Magoo and I took Randy Smith when he was drafted out to Darien Lake. And the Darien Lake, they didn't have, I think Dury was part of that group too, Dury Burns.
Yeah, he mentioned
they didn't have a uniform or sneakers for him. And Randy Smith turned that out, man. He turned that game. That game was outdoors, out playing against Herm Gillian, Emmett, I can't think of Emmett's name right off the top of my head, and Herm Gilliam, downtown, Freddie Brown. I mean, with some good athletes that they drafted. But Randy was the catalyst that kept that franchise together because he came in, worked from the bottom, and became an NBA All-Star, Iron Man, the most consecutive games in the NBA. It just was is amazing story. I'm gonna let Jury spend a little bit more time with that because Jury has some personal, not only personal, but some quality issues around why that statue needs to be built out at Buffalo State College. Right. And Randy earned them stripes. He was All-American in track. He was All-American in basketball, soccer. He earned them stripes to be recognized.
Absolutely.
So the Buffalo Braves was it was a decision. Let me tell you what happened on that. It was a marketing decision. In terms of the population of the city and the surrounding community had two other sports they were supporting. They're supporting hockey and football.
Right.
And you got to understand the economics of that. How many in the urban center had the kind of incomes to buy season tickets to the games? We can come to the games, but we were walk-ons at the game. When I mean by walk-on, we walk up to the ticket boxes and buy our tickets. Mm-hmm. We wasn't season ticket holders. Even though the majority of them athletes was African Americans, they had, some Caucasians, the Bob Cosmans, and a few other good athletes who played on the team. But the problem there was, it was an error when the transition was taking place. We were losing jobs in the auto industry. We was losing jobs in the steel industry. It was a transition of, families, things going disarray. So the analytics of it, that in terms of financing the NBA team, and we already got one in New York City, and Buffalo couldn't afford it. So Paul Snyder had to make a move to sell that so he could come out with some revenue based on his investment. And he were able to connect with John Y. Brown out of Kentucky. John Y. Brown was a race horse owner. And John Y. Brown got involved and sold the franchise to San Diego. And when you look at that market, which is the Clipper, they're in LA now, but it was San Diego Clippers. The Clippers were the former Buffalo Braves that exist in the NBA today. So it was all economics, man. It was it was all based on dollars and cents. When you look at the population, you look at the percentage of African Americans, how many were gainfully employed, had professional jobs at that time, could afford season tickets to keep a team like that. We didn't have them numbers. So the Caucasian, you got to take in consideration, they were supporting the Sabres and the Buffalo Bills with season tickets.
Yep.
So that maintained the franchise. And we couldn't do that. And we brought in people like Nate Archibald came to Buffalo at the last minute. Moses Malone, he was here for a day before they shipped out and sold him. So they had to do what they had to do at that time. And I think economically, we couldn't support three major league teams in the city of Buffalo. That's why we don't have a Major League Baseball. We just don't have the economics, the financial strength to be able to take care of that in population.
Wow. I just know that the Buffalo Braves are definitely missed. They are definitely missed.
Yeah, they definitely missed. Can you imagine if we were able to keep that and what the worth of that NBA franchise would be today? But these NBA franchises are in major markets, Doug. They're in markets where even like here in Texas, you're talking about 8 million people. You know, if you got a 4 million or something in Houston alone, in the surrounding communities, you're talking about 8 million, the fourth largest city in the city. I mean, in the world. You know what I'm saying? So in the United States, let's clear that up. So these major markets can afford it. Buffalo couldn't afford it.
Okay.
We just didn't have that economic.
So in closing, well, before I go to the close, I want to kind of step away from that 4 minute. I got to do this because this is another side question. You were part of the first Juneteenth committee. I saw your name. I saw your name on that list. Could you talk to us about how you got involved and what your role in that was?
Yeah, well, here the history connects with NICYO, the Randy Smith League. You know, we had Mr. Price, Bill Gator, and others. They knew I was the guru organizing sports among the inner city. My job at that time was to put on some organized sports activities for the Juneteenth, which we did. You know, we had basketball games at MLK Park, then called Humboldt Park, you know, on that first Juneteenth day. You know, I can remember, you know, seeing that first parade. I mean, and going down Jefferson Avenue. I can remember going to the first ball, the Juneteenth ball.
Malika.
Yeah, I think it was at the skate land. If I'm not
kidding, it was.
No, if my mind is, but that was one of the greatest experiences at my time. But you know what I want to give credit to is what Bill Gator, Mr. Price, Eugene Price, I think it's
Judson Price, Eugene Pierce, yep.
Justin Price, right? Justin Price, Eugene Pierce.
Yes,
that's the name. Mr. Pierce, them guys took me under their wings. Another credit I want to give Johnny B. Wiley. You
Yes.
know, he supported me. You know, he every time I came to him talking about what we need to do and how we need to help these young men and women, they were there for me. You know, and I can't um forget about Mr. Eve. You know, Art Eve was, man, he was my guy. I mean, he came, I'll never forget the day he came to JFK Recreation Center, and he hit that door running. And me and a guy by the name of Ricky Livis, Ricky and I stopped him at that door and said, "Man, you got to help us, Art. You know, we need money for services for these kids." And I went back, man, and drummed and walked them halls of Albany, and him and his New York crew put that prevention dollars in. Because the main thing was, why we keep putting these kids in group homes and locking them up? Let's give them something before they get there. You know, so,
I've seen pictures of
Juneteenth.
I saw pictures of Arthur Eve playing basketball on the court with the
Yeah, yeah. He was a player, and you know, and you going back to the Juneteenth piece, that you know, it was something always dear to my heart from day one. You know, we involved ourselves throughout the years, even with our hot dog carts. You know, I was one of the originators of the hot dog carts.
I saw
You
we
know,
have a clip of you with your Texas Hots
yeah,
card.
yeah, right. You know, and that idea came when I worked in New York City. I worked in the Two World Trade Center, Doug, and
Mm.
I used to come downstairs, and a vending cart used to be there, and I was at that time dating Maddie and everything, and I would eat hot dogs off that cart. And one day I asked the Greek, I said, "How can I get me a cart?" And it all started in coming, eating lunch, and meeting this Greek guy, and he helped me bring that cart to Buffalo, New York. And CAO had one too. The CAO, they Community Action Organization, they had one, but I'm the one who really started putting it out on the community and, you know, making that visible. And I was pushing at that time on the front, Maddie's Texas House. Yeah, so that was, you know, that's how we market that name. We started on that hot dog cart, marketing that name, Maddie's Texas Hops. And man, you know, it was a great experience. And I look at where, you know, we have come today. All that came from work ethic. You know, we got up, my wife and I, in my career, I got up every day to do some work, Doug. I owned my first house when I was 19 years of age. You know, and that all came with work ethic. On my first brand new car in 1971, work ethic. You know, and that's what we got to encourage our our people is work ethic. Whatever choice or wherever field you might go into in life, you got to put the time in and work at it to be good at it.
Absolutely.
So, you know, that's my history.
Absolutely. So, in closing, what do you think the overall impact of the Randy Smith Basketball Classic was to the city of Buffalo?
It was a major impact. It provided so many young men and women to get a quality education. Even my two sons took an opportunity, was to say three. Maddie's biological son, Jeffrey, went on to St. Bonaventures, and he's sharp. Jeffrey Warren. My son, Lamar Holt, went on to Prairie View A&M, you know, in mathematics. Then I had my son, um, Kevin Cooper, who went to Xavier University, but we lost him in the junior year in college because he had spinal meningitis. But
Mhm.
that sports program was huge, man. It was huge. It helped so many talented young men and women. It helped so many talented young men. You know,
Well,
not to be a professional athlete. Only professional athlete came out of that was Keith Robinson, who really, you know, in that era. But it was so many young men and women who became productive citizens, you know, and receive quality education. So that's what it's all about, brother. There's more people, you know, working every day and trying to help feed their families and, you know, raise their kids than an entertainer or an athlete.
George, it was George Butch Holt. It has been an honor to have you on the Buffalo History Channel to share to finally have the story of the Randy Smith
Yes.
Basketball Classic.
Yes, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and give a shout out to all my Buffalonians. I'll probably be up there sometime soon. I think I'm going to definitely try to get at the 50th Juneteenth. That's going to be
I'm
coming
making
up
plans.
soon.
I'm planning for that myself.
Yeah, when is that? Is that going to be
that
this
that
year
would
or next year?
that would be was started in '76, so it would be
Yeah, yeah,
2026.
starting in 76.
Yep,
Yeah, that's gonna be my definitely landing spot that weekend.
absolutely, absolutely. I wouldn't miss it for the
Right,
world.
if God's willing, Doug, God's
God's
willing.
will, of course, absolutely,
Yes.
always.
Right. But it's
Okay,
certainly been a pleasure, man, and good seeing you again. Haven't seen you in a long time, and
yeah,
I'm glad you are continuing to do what you need to do, so people can read and understand the history of what's so important in Buffalo. Buffalo is a hidden jewel. If you can make it in Buffalo, you can make it anywhere in the world. That's been my thinking. I've been around the world, man. I've been blessed. But it all came from coming up in public housing, you know, and going to good quality schools that changed my life in terms and good work ethic. I had great parents, Doug. I had George and Velma Holt. I had some great parents. My dad was a pace setter, and my mother was also too.